Hey guys! Tonight we step into a world where your pocket never buzzes, your television never turns on, and the idea of scrolling for 3 straight hours simply doesn't exist. Instead, the evening air smells of wood smoke, fresh earth, and whatever dinner is still bubbling over a fire. You stand beneath a sky so crowded with stars that it almost feels unfair compared with the washed-out glow above most modern cities. It seems peaceful, until you realize boredom is coming and there isn't a single glowing rectangle waiting to rescue you. In fact, you probably won't survive this. Well, at least not without discovering just how creative human beings become when entertainment isn't delivered by an algorithm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know where you're listening from and what your local time is. It's always fascinating to imagine this little nighttime gathering stretching across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before sunrise because for most of human history, the sun, not an alarm clock, is your schedule. The room is quiet, except for the occasional creak of timber and the sleepy sound of someone outside coaxing a stubborn chicken into behaving like a respectable member of society. Spoiler alert, the chicken has other plans. The day begins with work, that much is unavoidable. Whether you are gathering food, tending crops, repairing tools, or helping your family survive another season, there is always something demanding your attention. But here's the interesting part. People in the past weren't working every single second. Historians know that while life was often physically demanding, there were pauses scattered throughout the day. Waiting for bread to bake, watching sheep graze, sitting beside fishing nets, resting after harvesting. These quiet stretches created empty moments that needed filling. And unlike today, nobody could instantly reach into a pocket and summon millions of cat videos. You discover that boredom itself isn't your enemy. It is simply an invitation. Modern psychologists often suggest that moments of boredom encourage creativity, and although ancient people didn't have research papers explaining this, they certainly understood the feeling. When nothing exciting happened, someone made something exciting happen. A stick became a sword. A stone became a game. A funny voice became a comedy performance. Someone probably invented an entirely unnecessary competition involving throwing oddly shaped vegetables. Honestly, humanity has always been wonderfully strange. One mainstream historical fact stands out immediately. Before electric lighting became widespread in the 19th century, evenings were much darker than most people today experience. Candlelight and firelight limited activities after sunset, meaning people naturally gathered together rather than disappearing into separate glowing screens. Imagine that. Instead of everyone sitting silently while pretending not to check notifications, entire families actually looked at each other. Terrifying. As daylight slowly brightens the fields around you, familiar sounds begin filling the air. A dog barks, axes strike wood, children laugh somewhere beyond a fence. Birdsong layers itself over everything like nature's own playlist, except this one never asks you whether you'd like to upgrade to premium. You begin noticing something else. People constantly observe their surroundings. Clouds predict weather. Animal behavior hints at seasonal changes. Plants reveal which paths are safe. Without endless digital stimulation, your attention stretches outward instead of inward. The world itself becomes fascinating. Historians still argue whether people in earlier centuries actually experienced boredom as frequently as modern people define it, or if their expectations of daily excitement were simply very different. It's one of those questions without a perfect answer, because emotions rarely leave behind written instruction manuals. Yet, even if life demanded hard work, everyone still searched for joy. Sometimes joy arrived unexpectedly. Perhaps a neighbor tells an exaggerated hunting story. Perhaps two goats decide today is the perfect day to headbutt each other for absolutely no productive reason. You watch. Everyone watches. Congratulations, you've just attended prehistoric live television. One quirky historical tidbit suggests that ancient people occasionally kept unusual pets, from tame ravens to clever monkeys in some cultures, simply because watching animals could be endlessly entertaining. Human beings have apparently enjoyed observing ridiculous animal behavior for thousands of years. Some traditions never disappear. As morning turns toward afternoon, repetitive work settles into a rhythm. Hands continue moving almost automatically. Your thoughts begin wandering. Without music streaming through tiny earbuds, your imagination becomes surprisingly loud. You replay conversations, invent stories, wonder about distant lands. Try to remember whether that strange-shaped cloud resembles a horse or an angry cabbage. Mostly an angry cabbage. You may think ancient lives lacked imagination because technology was limited. In reality, imagination was one of humanity's greatest survival tools. Before novels were common, before cinemas existed, before radios filled homes with voices, nearly every exciting adventure unfolded inside someone's mind. That's an astonishing skill when you think about it. The human brain entertained itself long before silicon chips ever existed. As the afternoon continues, work slows. The hottest hours often encourage a brief rest in many warmer regions. Shade becomes valuable. A large tree transforms into the world's oldest relaxation lounge. Nobody checks emails, because, thankfully, emails haven't been invented yet. You simply sit. You notice insects humming nearby, wind moving through leaves, the smell of dust mixing with grass. These tiny details rarely make headlines, but together they build an experience modern people often miss while multitasking through life. You begin realizing something surprising. Boredom isn't always empty. Sometimes boredom is spacious. It gives your mind room to breathe. It encourages curiosity. Someone nearby begins carving patterns into wood, not because they must, but because their hands enjoy creating something beautiful. Another person hums an old melody while repairing a basket. Neither activity exists for profit. Neither earns internet points. Both simply make the day more pleasant. This may be one of humanity's oldest habits. When there is no instant entertainment, people become entertainers themselves. That truth follows you as the sun slowly starts sinking lower, painting warm colors across fields and rooftops. The workday fades. The truly interesting hours are about to begin. Remember that feeling of reaching for a phone the moment silence appears? Tonight, there is no phone, only gathering voices, growing shadows, and the promise that someone somewhere nearby is already preparing a story worth staying awake to hear.
The last glow of daylight slips below the horizon, and almost without anyone announcing it, the village begins to gather. No notification chime tells people that the evening event has started. No calendar reminder pops up. No live stream countdown appears in the corner of your vision. Instead, smoke rising from chimneys, familiar footsteps along worn paths, and the comforting sight of neighbors drifting toward the same fire are all the invitation anyone needs. You follow them. The air cools quickly now. During the day, fields seemed endless, but at night, the world becomes smaller. Firelight creates little islands of warmth surrounded by darkness, and beyond that darkness lie forests, hills, distant rivers, and countless things your imagination happily exaggerates. After all, everything sounds much larger when you can't see it. A rustling bush could be a rabbit, or a deer, or, if you've listened to one too many dramatic storytellers, an enormous monster that somehow only attacks people who forgot to bring extra bread. Funny how legends always have oddly specific rules. You settle onto a rough wooden bench. Someone else simply sits on the ground. Children squeeze together near the front because they don't want to miss a single word. The oldest members of the community receive the best places, not because they're celebrities, because they remember. Long before books became common possessions, memory was one of the greatest treasures a person could own. Entire family histories, local traditions, songs, practical advice, and heroic tales survived because someone could recite them again and again. This is one of the most well-known historical facts about many ancient and medieval societies. Oral storytelling preserved knowledge across generations before widespread literacy made written records accessible to ordinary people. You begin understanding that entertainment and education aren't separate things here. They're partners. A story about a foolish hunter makes everyone laugh while quietly teaching patience. A legend about wandering too far into dangerous woods reminds children to stay close. A humorous tale about a greedy merchant warns adults against selfishness. Even the funniest stories often carry useful lessons tucked inside them like little surprises. The storyteller clears his throat. Immediately, the conversations soften. No microphone, no stage lights, no dramatic soundtrack, just one human voice. Yet somehow everyone pays attention. Perhaps that's because people spend their entire lives practicing the art of listening. Modern life trains you to divide your attention. You watch television while checking messages. You listen to music while exercising. You answer emails while pretending to attend meetings. Ancient evenings ask for something different. One voice, one story, one shared experience. The storyteller begins describing a hero who crosses impossible mountains, bargains with mysterious spirits, and accidentally insults a king at sneezing at exactly the wrong moment. The crowd bursts into laughter. Honestly, some jokes never expire. Physical comedy probably existed since the first person slipped in mud while everyone else witnessed it. Somewhere nearby, a baby starts crying. Without missing a beat, the storyteller changes his voice, pretending the crying belongs to an angry dragon demanding another bedtime snack. The crowd laughs again. Even the baby's mother smiles. Improvisation, it turns out, isn't a modern invention. Historians still argue whether certain famous legends originated from real historical events or gradually grew larger through centuries of retelling. Every generation adds tiny details, removes others, and shapes the story to fit its own audience. It's rather like the world's slowest game of telephone, only with more dragons and significantly fewer smartphones. As the fire crackles, shadows dance across everyone's faces. Firelight changes people. Expressions seem deeper. Eyes reflect orange light. Every dramatic pause feels longer. The storyteller knows exactly when to whisper, exactly when to shout, exactly when to stop speaking entirely. Silence becomes part of the performance. That silence would probably make many modern audiences uncomfortable. Someone might instinctively reach for a phone after 3 whole seconds. Here, nobody moves. Everyone waits, because waiting builds anticipation. One quirky historical tidbit suggests that in some cultures, professional storytellers were believed to possess almost magical memories, capable of recalling astonishingly long epics from beginning to end without reading a single word. Imagine memorizing thousands upon thousands of lines. Meanwhile, today, you sometimes walk into another room and completely forget why. Human memory is wonderfully inconsistent. As another tale begins, you notice something else. People aren't passive listeners. They interrupt, they laugh, they gasp. Someone corrects a tiny detail from last winter's version of the story. The storyteller grins and dramatically insists his version is obviously better. A playful debate follows. Nobody seems bothered. The story belongs to everyone. Entertainment isn't something purchased, it's something shared. Outside the circle of light, stars slowly multiply overhead. Without electric lights washing away the sky, the heavens appear breathtakingly bright. The pale ribbon of the Milky Way stretches from horizon to horizon. Children occasionally point upward, asking questions no adult can answer with certainty. Why do stars move? Why does the moon change shape? What's beyond the darkness? The adults offer explanations based on local traditions, religion, or old legends. Some answers are surprisingly thoughtful. Others are delightfully imaginative. Perhaps those tiny lights are campfires belonging to ancestors. Perhaps they're holes poked through the sky itself. Perhaps they're giant birds carrying glowing feathers. None of these explanations satisfy modern astronomy, but every one of them satisfies curiosity for another evening. And curiosity, more than certainty, keeps conversations alive. You begin noticing how storytelling sweetly strengthens friendships. Everyone has heard these tales before, yet everyone comes anyway. Not because they expect a different ending, because hearing familiar stories together reminds people they belong together. It's remarkably similar to watching your favorite movie for the 10th time. You already know every twist. You still enjoy every moment. Only this version includes fresh bread, warm firelight, and someone snoring gently in the background before the hero has even reached the halfway point of the adventure. Yes, someone has fallen asleep, not because the story is boring, because they woke up before sunrise. Honestly, they're doing their best. The storyteller reaches the dramatic ending. The hero returns home wiser than before. The monster is defeated. The clever trickster escapes punishment. Justice, more or less, has been served. Satisfied murmurs spread through the crowd. People stretch. Someone tosses another log onto the fire. Tiny sparks whirl upward into the night, looking for a brief second like new stars joining the old ones. You smile without quite realizing it. Nothing about this evening required electricity. Nothing required batteries. Nothing required an internet connection. All it required was a few people, one good voice, willing listeners, and enough imagination to turn ordinary darkness into an unforgettable theater. The fire burns steadily beside you as another familiar face leans forward with a grin. Apparently, they have a story too.
Another storyteller barely waits for the laughter to fade before clearing her throat, and almost immediately the circle settles again. There is no official schedule, no printed program, and certainly no glowing sign that says next performance begins in 10 seconds. Somehow, everyone simply knows that the night is still young. You lean a little closer to the fire. The warmth reaches your face, and the cool night brushes against your back. It is a pleasant balance, one that people have enjoyed for thousands of years. Somewhere nearby, a log pops loudly, sending a shower of tiny sparks into the darkness. For one brief moment, every child believes the fire has decided to throw its own little celebration. The evening's next entertainment doesn't begin with words. It begins with music. A single voice quietly hums a melody so familiar that several others instinctively join in. Within seconds, the lonely tune grows into something much richer. Different voices weave together, some carrying the melody, others adding simple harmonies learned not from written notes, but from years of listening. There are no headphones, no amplifiers, no carefully edited recordings, only human breath becoming music. One of the most widely accepted historical facts is that music has existed in every known human culture. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient flutes carved from bird bones and mammoth ivory, dating back tens of thousands of years, suggesting that long before written history, people were already creating melodies to accompany their lives. Think about that. Before cities, before kingdoms, before money, someone looked at a hollow bone and thought, I wonder if this thing can become a song. That is a wonderfully human idea. You watch an elderly musician lift a simple wooden flute to his lips. The first notes drift into the cool air, soft enough that even the nearby crickets seem almost respectful. The melody isn't complicated. It doesn't need to be. Its beauty comes from familiarity. Children know it, Parents know it. Grandparents have probably known it since they were small enough to trip over chickens, which, judging by the way chickens behave, probably happened quite often. Soon, another instrument joins in. Perhaps it is a small harp, perhaps a lyre with carefully stretched strings, perhaps a simple drum keeping time with a steady heartbeat-like rhythm. These instruments vary across cultures, but their purpose remains remarkably similar. They gather people. Music does something conversation cannot. Words explain. Music connects. You don't need to understand every lyric to feel the emotion behind a song. A joyful tune encourages dancing. A slow melody invites quiet reflection. A lively rhythm somehow convinces even the most stubborn person that maybe, just maybe, they should clap along, even if they have absolutely no sense of rhythm. You notice one man enthusiastically clapping on what appears to be an entirely different beat from everyone else. Bless him. His confidence deserves admiration. Historians still argue whether many traditional folk songs accurately preserved historical events or gradually transformed into symbolic stories over generations. Some ballads may describe real battles or real heroes, while others likely blend truth and imagination until separating them becomes nearly impossible. Perhaps that's part of their charm. Facts tell you what happened. Songs tell you what people remembered. As the music continues, a few younger villagers step into the open space near the fire. Without formal instruction, they begin dancing. Nothing elaborate, simple steps, hands joined, feet moving together in repeating patterns. One person laughs after stepping the wrong direction. Another spins a little too quickly and nearly loses balance. The mistake only makes everyone laugh harder. Nobody gives a low score. There are no judges holding numbered cards, no comment section waiting to criticize someone's footwork. The purpose isn't perfection, it's participation. You realize that many ancient dances served several purposes at once. They celebrated harvests, marked weddings, honored religious festivals, welcomed travelers, or simply provided an excuse to enjoy each other's company after a demanding day. Entertainment rarely existed in isolation. It strengthened communities. That may explain why people remembered these dances for generations. One quirky historical tidbit comes to mind. In parts of medieval Europe, some festivals featured energetic dances that occasionally became so enthusiastic that religious leaders worried people were having just a little too much fun. Imagine receiving a lecture because your village dance party became excessively cheerful. Human beings truly have a talent for surprising one another. A child suddenly grabs a pair of smooth sticks and begins tapping them together in time with the drum. Another follows using two wooden spoons. Someone else whistles. Before long, nearly everyone contributes something, even those who cannot sing particularly well, especially those who cannot sing particularly well. Oddly enough, they seem to enjoy themselves the most. The night fills with imperfect music, and somehow, imperfection makes it better. You think about modern playlists containing millions of professionally produced songs. They're extraordinary, but there is something different about hearing music that belongs entirely to the people creating it. No one owns tonight's melody. It belongs to everyone gathered around the fire. The stars continue wheeling slowly overhead. Their movement is too gradual to notice from minute to minute, yet by the end of the evening, they will have shifted noticeably across the sky. Time seems slower here, not because the hours last longer, because nobody is rushing through them. Another tune begins, this one quicker than the last. Children race around the edge of the gathering, pretending to be heroic warriors charging into battle. One tiny boy dramatically trips over absolutely nothing. He jumps up immediately, raises a stick like a victorious sword, and proudly announces that falling over was part of his strategy. Naturally, every great general has said exactly that. Laughter ripples across the gathering once more. It isn't loud, it doesn't overwhelm the music. It simply blends into it, becoming another instrument in the night's orchestra. You begin to understand that before technology, entertainment wasn't something consumed alone. It was experienced together. A story invited responses. A song invited voices. A dance invited movement. Even silence invited reflection. As the final notes of the evening's longest song slowly fade into the cool darkness, nobody rushes away. The fire still glows. The conversations continue. Someone nearby quietly begins tuning another instrument. Apparently, the night still has more surprises waiting.
The music fades gently into conversation, but the evening is far from over. Someone reaches into a small leather pouch and pours its contents onto a flat wooden table. Tiny stones, a few carved pieces of bone, several smooth pebbles collected from a nearby river. One oddly shaped nut that somehow has become an official game piece despite looking like it belongs in someone's dinner. No one questions it. Tradition is a funny thing. You move closer, curious to see how an entire evening of entertainment can emerge from objects that most modern people would walk past without a second glance. The oldest player grins. He has that unmistakable expression worn by someone who has defeated newcomers for decades and is quietly looking forward to doing it again. One of the most well-known historical facts is that board games have existed for thousands of years. Ancient civilizations played remarkably sophisticated games, including Egypt's Senet, Mesopotamia's royal game of and later many forms of chess and checkers that spread across continents. People have always enjoyed testing their luck and their minds. Apparently, arguing over game rules is also an ancient tradition. The first move is made. A carved stone slides across the board. Everyone leans in. It's amazing how quickly silence settles over the group. A game that would seem incredibly simple by modern standards suddenly carries enormous importance. You suspect that if someone invented a championship for watching paint dry, humans would eventually develop rankings, strategies, and fierce rivalries. Competition is one of our oldest hobbies. The players exchange playful smiles. One confidently moves a piece, another immediately shakes his head. "That's exactly what I wanted you to do," his expression seems to say. Whether that's true is another matter entirely. A few spectators whisper predictions. Children eagerly suggest impossible moves that would definitely break the rules. Someone insists they know a secret strategy taught by their grandfather. His grandfather, according to family legend, never lost. Conveniently, no one alive can verify that claim. Historians still argue whether certain ancient games were designed purely for entertainment or also carried symbolic religious meanings. Some scholars believe games like Senet represented a soul's journey through the afterlife, while others think people simply enjoyed a good challenge. Perhaps both are true. After all, humans are perfectly capable of turning something meaningful into fun, and something fun into something deeply meaningful. The game continues. No timers, no digital clocks counting down. Players think carefully before moving. Sometimes they stare at the board for many minutes. Nobody complains. Patience isn't considered wasted time. It's part of the experience. Modern life often rewards speed. Ancient games often rewarded observation. You notice something interesting. While only 2 people are officially playing, everyone else becomes part of the event. Spectators gasp. They laugh. They quietly celebrate clever moves. Someone dramatically groans after spotting a mistake 2 turns too late. Another mutters, "I saw that coming." Of course you did. Everyone becomes a genius immediately after the move has already happened. Some things truly never change. Nearby, another group starts an entirely different game. This one requires nothing more than 5 smooth stones. One player tosses a stone into the air, quickly scoops another from the ground, and catches the falling one before it lands. Then 2 stones, then 3. Soon the movements become astonishingly quick. One quirky historical tidbit is that games involving tossing and catching small stones have existed across many cultures for thousands of years, with surprisingly similar rules despite developing far apart geographically. Apparently, if you give humans a handful of rocks, they'll invent entertainment. It's almost guaranteed. Children invent their own variations. Adults remember older versions. Everyone insists theirs is the correct way. Naturally. Across the fire, someone produces a pair of carved dice. Immediately, a small crowd gathers. Dice are fascinating because they combine skill, probability, and just enough luck to convince everyone that fortune personally dislikes them. The first roll bounces across the table. Good result. Cheers. The second roll, terrible. Laughter. The third roll somehow lands exactly on its edge for a split second before toppling over. For one glorious moment, everyone considers whether that should count. A debate begins. It is friendly, it is passionate, it is absolutely impossible to settle. You suspect people have been arguing about suspicious dice rolls since the invention of dice themselves. As the evening stretches onward, games continue flowing naturally from one to another. Guessing riddles, memory challenges, quick contests of observation. Who can spot the first shooting star? Who remembers every item in the merchant's wagon? Who can imitate the village rooster most convincingly? That last competition becomes surprisingly competitive. Unfortunately, one participant sounds less like a rooster and more like an extremely confused goat. The goat, somewhere in the darkness, seems mildly offended. The crowd, however, finds this absolutely delightful. You begin noticing that these games serve purposes beyond passing time. Children sharpen memory. Adults practice strategy. Older generations teach patience. Nobody calls it education, yet everyone is learning. Without classrooms, many lessons arrive disguised as play. You glance around the gathering. Nobody seems bored. Not because extraordinary things are happening, because ordinary things have everyone's full attention. A handful of pebbles, a carved board, some worn dice, a circle of friends. Somewhere along the way, you've stopped comparing this world to your own. Instead, you're beginning to appreciate how much joy people could create with almost nothing at all. The fire burns a little lower now. A cool breeze drifts across the gathering. Someone quietly mentions that tomorrow is the beginning of the village festival. Instantly, tired faces brighten. Games are enjoyable. Stories are wonderful. Music is unforgettable. But tomorrow the entire village will celebrate. And that is something worth staying awake to imagine.
Morning arrives with a different kind of energy. You notice it before anyone says a word. The village doesn't simply wake, it buzzes. Doors open earlier than usual. Someone is already sweeping the dusty lane. Children, who somehow possess an endless supply of enthusiasm, despite having run around until late the previous evening, are darting between houses carrying baskets, ribbons, and mysterious bundles that adults keep reminding them not to drop. Naturally, one bundle is dropped within the first 5 minutes. Fortunately, it contains nothing more dramatic than a loaf of bread. The bread survives with only a slightly bruised sense of dignity. Today is not an ordinary day. Today is a festival. For people living before modern technology, festivals were among the most anticipated events of the entire year. They broke the rhythm of work, marked the changing seasons, celebrated successful harvests, honored religious traditions, or commemorated important moments in the community's history. you suddenly understand why everyone seems just a little lighter on their feet. Even chores feel different. Instead of repairing fences in silence, neighbors chat while decorating doorways with flowers, greenery, or colorful cloth. Someone hangs garlands across the village square. Another family prepares enormous pots of stew whose delicious aroma slowly conquers every nearby street. If smells had advertising agencies, fresh bread would win every award. You follow the growing crowd toward the center of the village. Yesterday, it was simply an open space. Today, it has become something entirely new. Simple wooden tables appear where there were none before. Cloth banners flutter gently in the breeze. Merchants arrange baskets filled with fruit, pottery, woven fabrics, carved toys, and tiny trinkets that somehow become irresistible the moment they're displayed together. It turns out window shopping existed long before windows did. One mainstream historical fact is that throughout medieval Europe, ancient Rome, China, the Islamic world, and countless other civilizations, festivals often coincided with market days. These gatherings allowed people not only to celebrate, but also to trade goods, exchange news, and meet travelers from distant places. Entertainment and commerce made surprisingly good neighbors. A farmer examines a beautifully crafted knife. A potter admires someone else's woven baskets. Children stare at handmade whistles with the same expression modern kids reserve for shiny new gadgets. Some desires never really change. You don't always need something. Sometimes you simply enjoy looking at it. Nearby, laughter erupts. A baker has arranged several tiny pastries into the shape of a sheep. One little boy points excitedly. Just before he can admire the artistic achievement any longer, someone eats the sheep's head. Art can be fleeting. Historians still argue whether many medieval festivals were as joyful as surviving illustrations suggest, or whether artists exaggerated the celebrations to present an idealized image of community life. Paintings often show smiling faces. Reality probably included sore feet, muddy roads, and at least one person complaining about the weather. Again, some traditions never disappear. Musicians begin playing lively tunes, and almost immediately people clap along. Yesterday's quiet evening melodies give way to brighter rhythms that encourage movement rather than reflection. A pair of dancers steps into the open square. Soon another pair joins them. Within minutes, half the village seems to be dancing while the other half watches with enormous enthusiasm. You briefly consider joining, then you remember your coordination. Perhaps enthusiastic clapping is the wiser choice. One quirky historical tidbit tells of medieval festivals where people elected temporary lords of misrule or similar playful figures who oversaw games, jokes, and harmless chaos for the day. For a short time, ordinary routines were turned upside down, allowing communities to laugh together before returning to everyday responsibilities. Imagine your office appointing a chief executive of silly ideas every Friday afternoon. Productivity might suffer. Morale would probably improve. As the afternoon turns into evening, competitions begin. Nothing too serious. Who can throw a wooden hoop the farthest? Who can split a log with the cleanest strike? Who can bake the finest loaf? Who grows the largest pumpkin? The pumpkin contest appears surprisingly intense. I suspect one competitor has been talking to his vegetables all year for motivational purposes. Honestly, it may have worked. Children invent contests of their own. Who can balance longest on a fallen tree trunk? Who can whistle loudest? Who can collect the prettiest feather? No medals are awarded. No viral videos record the winners. Yet every small victory feels enormous because everyone around you actually witnessed it. No replay required. You wander through the market once more. Travelers share stories from distant villages. One merchant describes a city with stone walls taller than any tree you've ever seen. Another insists he once crossed a river so wide you couldn't see the opposite bank. A third claims to have encountered a fish larger than a horse. That last story received polite skepticism. The fisherman listening nearby quietly raises one eyebrow. No words are needed. The crowd understands. Nice try. The afternoon sun casts long golden rays across the festival square. Food becomes the center of attention. Fresh bread, roasted vegetables, steaming pies, honey cakes, cheese, fruit. Simple meals by modern standards, perhaps, but after days of ordinary fare, today's feast feels extraordinary. People eat slowly, they linger. Conversation flows as naturally as the cider. Nobody seems eager for the day to end. You realize festivals weren't valuable because they happened constantly. They were valuable because they were rare. Weeks or months of ordinary life made these celebrations shine even brighter. Joy grows stronger when it has something to contrast against. As the sun begins its slow descent, musicians tune their instruments once again. The younger children are growing sleepy. The older ones absolutely refuse to admit they're tired. Adults smile knowingly. They've seen this performance every festival. Eventually, one determined child falls asleep while still holding half a honey cake. Quite an impressive achievement. The music grows louder. Lanterns begin appearing one by one. The celebration isn't ending, it's simply changing. As daylight fades into evening, distant laughter echoes across the square, and from somewhere beyond the market stalls comes the unmistakable sound of someone announcing that a troupe of traveling performers has finally arrived. Now the real spectacle is about to begin.
A ripple of excitement moves through the crowd faster than a strong wind across a wheat field. The performers are here! Nobody needs to repeat it twice. People begin drifting toward the village square, carrying stools, blankets, or simply the determination to stand wherever they can find a decent view. Children weave effortlessly through the gathering, slipping between adults with the remarkable confidence that only children seem to possess. You follow the crowd until you reach an open space surrounded by lanterns. There is no grand theater, no velvet curtain, no expensive ticket. Just a circle of eager faces waiting for strangers to transform an ordinary evening into something unforgettable. For much of history, traveling entertainers were among the few sources of completely new amusement. They arrived with unfamiliar songs, fresh stories, clever tricks, and news from places most villagers would never visit themselves. One mainstream historical fact is that throughout medieval Europe and many other parts of the world, wandering minstrels, actors, musicians, acrobats, puppeteers, and jesters traveled from town to town, performing in marketplaces, castles, inns, and village festivals. For many people, seeing these performers was as exciting as attending a major concert today. A wagon rolls into the square. It looks ordinary enough. A few trunks, bundles of costumes, musical instruments carefully wrapped in cloth. But within minutes, the wagon begins transforming into a stage. Wooden boards unfold, lanterns are hung, brightly painted cloth is stretched across the back. You can't help smiling. Humans have always been remarkably good at turning almost nothing into something magical. The leader of the troupe steps forward with an exaggerated bow. His hat is wonderfully ridiculous. It seems to contain enough feathers to outfit an entire flock of birds. He welcomes everyone with such dramatic enthusiasm that even the oldest villagers begin chuckling before the performance has properly started. Confidence, you realize, is half the show, perhaps even 3/4. He introduces each member of the troupe one by one, a musician carrying a small lute, an acrobat with astonishing balance, a puppeteer whose wooden figures peek curiously from a large chest, a comedian whose smile alone seems capable of making people laugh, and one mysterious performer who says absolutely nothing. Naturally, everyone becomes most interested in that person. Silence can be surprisingly intriguing. The musicians begin first. Their lively tune fills the square, and several children immediately start dancing without waiting for permission. No one stops them. In fact, a few adults quietly join in. It's difficult to remain perfectly serious when cheerful music insists otherwise. The comedian steps forward. He announces that he has traveled hundreds of miles to meet the finest audience in the kingdom.
Then he glances dramatically around the square. "Oh dear," his expression says, "I appear to be in the wrong village." Groans, laughter. Someone pretends to look offended. The comedian clutches his heart in exaggerated fear. Success. You discover that teasing an audience, gently, affectionately, has been part of live comedy for centuries. People enjoy laughing at themselves almost as much as laughing at everyone else. Well, usually. Historians still argue whether many medieval entertainers enjoyed high social status or lived difficult, uncertain lives despite bringing joy wherever they traveled. Their lives must have required tremendous courage. Every new town meant starting over. Every audience was different. Every performance carried the question, will they laugh tonight? The answer, fortunately, seems to be yes. The silent performer finally steps into the center of the stage. Without speaking a single word, he begins acting out the story of an overly confident knight attempting to impress a princess. Everything goes wrong. His imaginary horse refuses to cooperate. His invisible sword becomes hopelessly tangled. His grand salute ends with him stumbling backward into an equally imaginary puddle. The audience erupts with laughter. Not because the story is complicated, because every movement is wonderfully exaggerated. Sometimes words aren't necessary. One quirky historical tidbit comes from medieval festivals where performers occasionally trained clever animals to become part of the act. Monkeys, bears, goats, and even highly trained dogs sometimes amazed audiences with tricks, although historians debate how common these performances truly were. You silently hope any bears involved were having a reasonably pleasant day. A grumpy bear seems like a difficult coworker. Next comes the puppeteer. He opens the large wooden chest and lifts out beautifully carved figures painted in bright colors. A king, a dragon, a mischievous fox, a clever young girl. Within moments, the little wooden characters seem strangely alive. Children lean so far forward that their parents gently pull them back. Even adults watch with genuine fascination. The dragon roars. Well, it produces a noise that sounds slightly more like someone clearing their throat after swallowing dusty bread. But everyone accepts it. Imagination happily fills the gaps. The fox outsmarts the king. The clever girl rescues the village. The dragon, after much dramatic roaring, accidentally frightens itself and runs away. The smallest children cheer wildly. One little girl proudly announced she knew the fox would win all along. Of course she did. Heroes may surprise people. Foxes rarely do. As darkness deepens, lantern light flickers across smiling faces. The performers end with music once more. This time, the audience joins in almost immediately. The line between performer and spectator quietly disappears. Everyone sings, everyone claps, everyone becomes part of the show. Perhaps that's the greatest difference between ancient entertainment and much of today's. People didn't simply watch, they participated. The final note fades into the warm summer night. For a heartbeat, the square remains perfectly still. Then applause bursts forth, not the thunderous roar of thousands in a stadium, but the heartfelt appreciation of neighbors grateful for an evening they'll remember long after the wagon rolls away. You realize something quietly profound. Tomorrow, these performers will continue down another dusty road. Another village will hear their jokes. Another group of children will believe the puppets are alive. But tonight, for just a few precious hours, their stories belong entirely to you. The wagon stands ready for the next journey, while somewhere nearby, an elderly woman carefully unlocks a heavy wooden chest. Inside rests something even rarer than traveling performers. Books.
The laughter from the performers slowly fades into the warm night air, but nobody seems eager to go home just yet. Instead, a small crowd begins gathering around the elderly woman and her heavy wooden chest. You notice how carefully she handles it. Not casually, not absent-mindedly, with the kind of respect usually reserved for treasured family heirlooms. She lifts the lid. Inside, wrapped in layers of linen cloth, rests a single large book. Several people instinctively lean forward. Not because the cover is decorated with jewels, not because it glows with magical light, simply because books are rare. One of the best established historical facts is that before the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, books had to be copied by hand, page after page. Producing a single manuscript could take months or even years, making books extraordinarily valuable possessions. You suddenly understand why nobody is allowed to hold it with sticky fingers or with fingers that have recently been exploring mud puddles. One enthusiastic little boy receives a gentle reminder after attempting exactly that. The book survives, his pride recovers eventually. The elderly woman carefully opens the thick pages. Even in the lantern light, you can see the beautiful lettering stretching across each sheet. Bright red capitals, elegant black script, tiny painted decorations curling around the margins. Some pages include colorful illustrations of kings, animals, saints, forests, or mythical creatures. Each image has been painted by hand. Someone devoted countless hours to creating every tiny detail. It's almost impossible not to admire the patience involved. You think about downloading an entire library in seconds. Then imagine spending 6 months copying just one chapter. Perspective arrives rather quickly. The woman begins reading aloud. Her voice is calm, steady, measured. Every word receives the attention it deserves. Many listeners cannot read themselves, yet they follow every sentence with remarkable concentration. Reading in this world is often a shared experience rather than a private one. Books speak to groups as much as individuals. The story tells of a traveler crossing distant mountains in search of wisdom. Along the journey, he meets shepherds, merchants, scholars, and mysterious strangers whose advice gradually changes his understanding of the world. The audience listens quietly. No one interrupts, no one whispers. Even the children seem unusually still. Words carry weight when they are difficult to obtain. Historians still argue whether literacy spread more rapidly in certain rural communities than surviving records suggest. Since ordinary people left behind relatively few written documents, it's often difficult to know exactly how many could read at different points in history. Knowledge leaves uneven footprints. Some survive clearly, others fade almost completely. As the reading continues, the elderly woman occasionally pauses. Not because she has forgotten the next line, because someone asks a question. What does that word mean? Why did the traveler make that choice? Could the mountain represent something besides a mountain? Soon the reading becomes a conversation. Ideas bounce gently around the circle. Everyone contributes. Books do not simply provide answers, they invite discussion. You smile. Apparently, coffee shops existed long before book clubs, although the snacks probably involved considerably more bread. A young girl studies one colorful illustration with complete fascination. It depicts an enormous creature somewhere between a lion, an eagle, and an artist who had clearly never seen either one in real life. One quirky historical tidbit is that medieval manuscripts sometimes included wonderfully imaginative drawings of exotic animals based entirely on second-hand descriptions. An illustrator might hear about an elephant from a traveler who had heard about one from another traveler. The result could be creative. Let's just say some medieval elephants looked surprisingly interested in becoming potatoes. Nobody at the time seemed especially concerned. The important thing was the story, not zoological perfection. The woman turns another page.
The smell of old parchment drifts faintly through the air. It carries hints of leather, ink, and time itself. You realize that every crease on the page represents years of careful use. Generations may have read these same words. Children who are now grandparents once listened to these stories from exactly the same manuscript. Books become bridges across time. Long after their authors are gone, their voices continue speaking. That thought feels strangely comforting. Nearby, one of the traveling performers quietly sketches one of the manuscript's illustrations onto a scrap of parchment. He smiles appreciatively. Good stories inspire more stories. Good art inspires more art. Creativity has always been wonderfully contagious. Eventually, the reading reaches its conclusion. The traveler returns home, not wealthier, not more powerful, simply wiser. The audience sits in thoughtful silence for a few moments. No dramatic applause follows. None is needed. Some stories ask to be celebrated, others ask to be reflected upon. This one chooses the second path. The precious manuscript is gently wrapped once more in linen. The chest closes with a soft wooden thud. Its treasures disappear from view until another evening. You realize that before books became common, hearing a well-told story read aloud could feel every bit as exciting as watching the newest film premiere today. Perhaps even more so, because opportunities were rare, and rarity has a way of making moments unforgettable. As the gathering slowly begins to disperse, you notice several children wandering towards the edge of the village instead of their homes. One carries a walking stick, another holds a woven basket, a third simply points excitedly toward the moonlit meadow beyond the last cottages. Apparently, tomorrow's entertainment won't be found inside books. It will be waiting outside, in the forests, fields, and rivers that have quietly entertained humanity since long before anyone learned to write.
The village slowly disappears behind you as the road widens and becomes smoother. Fields give way to carefully tended gardens. Simple cottages become elegant stone buildings. The occasional wagon is replaced by finely decorated carriages, their polished wheels rolling gracefully over the road. You are leaving behind ordinary village life for a place where entertainment is not merely enjoyed, it is expected. Ahead, rising above the surrounding countryside, stands a great castle. Its towers catch the morning sunlight. Bright banners flutter from the walls, each carrying the colors and symbols of the noble family who lives within. Even from a distance, the place feels alive. Messengers hurry through the gates. Servants carry baskets overflowing with fresh bread, vegetables, fruit, and flowers. Stable hands brush magnificent horses until their coats shine. Somewhere inside, musicians are already tuning their instruments. One of the best established historical facts is that medieval royal and noble courts served as important centers of entertainment. Kings, queens, princes, and nobles regularly hosted feasts, tournaments, musical performances, poetry readings, theatrical productions, and elaborate celebrations to strengthen alliances and display their wealth. Life at court could be every bit as busy as life in a village, just considerably better dressed. You pass beneath the castle gate. The courtyard hums with activity. A falcon circles briefly overhead before returning to the gloved arm of its handler. Servants cross paths with astonishing precision, somehow avoiding collisions despite carrying enough dishes to feed what appears to be half the kingdom. You suspect they've mastered a secret art. Either that, or they've simply learned never to stand in the middle of a busy hallway. The great hall is breathtaking. Sunlight pours through tall windows, illuminating polished wooden tables stretching almost the entire length of the room. Bright tapestries cover the walls. They depict heroic battles, mythical creatures, hunting scenes, and ancient legends.
Some tell stories without a single written word. You pause to admire one enormous woven scene, showing a knight chasing what appears to be an extremely determined boar. The boar looks suspiciously confident. You quietly hope it escaped. Musicians begin playing near the far end of the hall. Their instruments fill the room with graceful melodies, while guests slowly arrive, greeting one another with practiced courtesy. Conversation here differs from the relaxed gossip of the village well. Words are chosen carefully. Compliments are offered generously. Jokes are delivered with just enough elegance to avoid causing offense, usually. One nobleman attempts an elaborate pun involving horses. Silence follows. A single polite cough echoes somewhere across the hall. Perhaps the less said about that joke, the better. Historians still argue whether life in medieval courts was as glamorous as surviving paintings suggest, or whether constant etiquette, political tension, and competition made court life surprisingly stressful behind its elegant appearance. Magnificent clothing can hide many worries. Soon the feast begins. Servants carry in steaming platters, one after another. Roasted meats, fresh fish, cheeses, seasonal fruits, warm loaves of bread, pies filled with herbs and vegetables, bowls of berries glistening in the sunlight. The aromas drift through the hall with remarkable determination. You suddenly understand why banquets lasted for hours. Nobody wanted them to end. One quirky historical tidbit comes from medieval banquets where elaborate sugar sculptures, known as subtleties, were sometimes displayed between courses. These edible works of art might resemble castles, ships, mythical creatures, or entire landscapes before eventually becoming dessert. Imagine spending hours building a magnificent sugary dragon only for someone to politely ask if they may eat its tail. The dragon surely would understand. Between courses, entertainers step forward. A jester wearing brightly colored clothing begins juggling polished wooden balls, then knives. Then, after carefully looking around for dramatic effect, he pretends to juggle an egg. The audience gasps. The egg slips. He catches it at the very last moment. Thunderous applause. He bows deeply. Only afterwards does he quietly reveal the egg was carved from wood. The crowd laughs even harder. Sometimes the greatest trick is convincing people to imagine the danger. Next comes a poet. Unlike the lively storyteller around the village fire, this performer recites carefully crafted verses celebrating courage, loyalty, changing seasons, and the fleeting nature of time. The hall grows wonderfully still. Even those who cannot remember every line appreciate the rhythm. Words arranged beautifully have always carried their own kind of music. Nearby, several nobles gather around a chessboard. The game unfolds slowly, thoughtfully. Every move receives careful consideration. Observers whisper possible strategies. Nobody touches the pieces without permission. You recognize the familiar look of intense concentration. Apparently, overthinking chess positions is a timeless human tradition. A young page watches quietly beside the table. His eyes move from player to player, absorbing every lesson without anyone formally teaching him. Entertainment once again becomes education. The pattern continues. As evening approaches, dancers fill the center of the hall. Their graceful movements reflect years of practice, elegant bows, measured steps, perfect timing. You briefly imagine yourself attempting the same dance. The image is not encouraging. Best to admire from a safe distance. Laughter echoes warmly beneath the high wooden ceiling. Candles flicker inside polished silver holders. Outside, twilight gently settles across the castle grounds. The feast gradually draws towards a close. Guests depart carrying pleasant memories, full stomachs, and perhaps one or two stories made slightly grander than they truly were. After all, Stories enjoy a comfortable seat at every banquet. As you leave the great hall, the cool evening air greets you once more. The castle slowly fades behind. Tomorrow, the grand feasts and elegant performances will give way to something far simpler and perhaps even more remarkable. Children, armed with nothing more than imagination, will prove once again that the greatest playground humanity has ever invented is the human mind itself.
The next morning begins not with celebration or performance, but with the quiet rhythm of hands already at work. You notice it everywhere. A woman sits outside her cottage with a basket of colorful wool beside her, gently drawing thread through her fingers. An older man sharpens a carving knife against a smooth stone with slow, practiced movements. Across the lane, someone repairs a cracked clay pot while humming yesterday's festival tune. Nobody appears rushed. Nobody seems bored, because creating something is, in itself, a kind of entertainment. Long before hobbies had names or craft stores sold endless supplies, people filled spare moments by making useful and often beautiful objects. One of the best established historical facts is that in many ancient and medieval societies, nearly every household produced at least some of its own clothing, tools, baskets, candles, or household goods. Skills that today might be considered hobbies were once part of everyday life. Yet usefulness didn't prevent creativity, quite the opposite. You watch the woman weaving bright threads together. Technically, she's making cloth, but she could have chosen plain colors. Instead, tiny patterns slowly emerge beneath her fingers. Diamonds, lines, simple flowers, little touches that aren't strictly necessary. They're simply pleasing. Human beings have always decorated the ordinary. Someone could have invented the plain wooden spoon. Instead, they carved little swirls into the handle. Why? Because it made them smile. And honestly, that's a perfectly respectable reason. Nearby, a young apprentice tries carving a wooden bird. The result resembles, well, let's call it an enthusiastic potato with wings. His teacher studies it thoughtfully. "You've captured its spirit," he says kindly. The apprentice beams with pride. Sometimes encouragement is the finest tool in the workshop. The old craftsman quietly reshapes the beak while pretending not to. You pretend not to notice. Historians still argue whether decorative crafts spread mainly through trade between distant communities or whether similar artistic ideas simply emerged independently in different places. The same spiral patterns, geometric designs, and stylized animals appear across cultures separated by remarkable distances. Perhaps beauty travels more easily than people imagine. The workshop fills with familiar sounds: wood shavings curling to the floor, scissors clipping thread, clay gently slapped into shape, the rhythmic tap, tap, tap of a tiny hammer. It's surprisingly soothing, almost musical. You realize many people probably entered these quiet moments not because they needed another basket or another carved spoon, but because their hands enjoyed having something to do. Modern life often entertains the eyes. Traditional crafts entertained the hands. There's a subtle difference. You don't simply observe progress, you create it. One quirky historical tidbit comes from medieval scribes who occasionally slipped tiny doodles into the margins of manuscripts. Alongside serious religious texts, you sometimes find amusing drawings of rabbits chasing knights, monkeys playing musical instruments, or snails heroically confronting armored warriors. Nobody knows exactly why snails became such unlikely celebrities. Perhaps medieval artists simply had an excellent sense of humor, or perhaps one particularly determined snail earned everyone's respect. The debate continues. Across the courtyard, children gather around an elderly basket maker. Instead of giving a formal lesson, he simply begins weaving. The children watch, then imitate. One basket immediately collapses. Another leans dramatically to one side. A third somehow develops two bottoms, an impressive achievement considering most baskets are perfectly content with one. Nobody laughs unkindly. Mistakes are expected. After all, every skilled craftsperson once produced something wonderfully terrible. You notice how naturally knowledge passes from one generation to the next. No instruction manual, no online tutorial, just careful observation, gentle correction, patient repetition. Someone demonstrates, someone practices, someone eventually teaches another. The chain quietly continues. As the afternoon sun pours warm light through the open workshop, finished creations begin accumulating. Freshly carved toys, new clay bowls, woven mats, embroidered cloth. Each object carries tiny imperfections. Each one is unmistakably handmade. That's part of their charm. You think about modern factories producing thousands of identical items every hour. Remarkable efficiency. Yet these handcrafted objects possess something different. Each reflects the personality of its maker. A slightly deeper carving here, a brighter thread there, a playful pattern tucked into an otherwise ordinary design. No two are completely alike. Outside, a little girl proudly presents her mother with a tiny flower crown woven from meadow blossoms. It lasts perhaps half an hour before wilting. Nobody minds. Some beautiful things are meant to be temporary. The mother wears it anyway, quite proudly. Nearby, another craftsman begins carving a flute from a straight branch. You watch him carefully hollow the wood, smooth the surface, shape the finger holes. Hours later, he gently blows the first note. It isn't perfect. He adjusts one opening, tries again. This time, the sound rings clear and warm. The branch has become music. That transformation feels almost magical, not because magic is involved, because patience is. As evening approaches, people begin packing away tools. Wood chips are swept aside, threads are gathered, clay is covered to keep it moist until tomorrow. Work ends, satisfaction remains. You leave the workshop carrying nothing, yet somehow you feel as though you've received a gift, a reminder that boredom often disappears the moment your hands begin creating instead of merely consuming. The sky slowly turns amber. In the distance, you hear cheers drifting toward the village. Apparently, another gathering is already beginning. Tomorrow won't revolve around quiet craftsmanship. It will echo with contests of strength, races, friendly rivalries, and roaring crowds eager to discover who earns the loudest applause. The village is preparing for its oldest sporting traditions.
The sound reaches you long before the crowd comes into view. A burst of cheering rises across the village, followed by laughter, a whistle, and the unmistakable groan of someone who has just realized they were a little too confident. You smile. Some things never change. Whether it is a medieval village green or a modern sports stadium, people have always enjoyed watching others attempt something difficult while quietly thinking, "I could probably do that," until they actually try. The open field beyond the cottages has been transformed overnight. Ropes mark out simple lanes. Wooden targets stand at one end of the meadow. A smooth log rests across two sturdy supports. Several long benches circle the field, already filling with eager spectators carrying bread, apples, and enough enthusiasm to power the entire event. There are no giant scoreboards, no instant replays, no commentators speaking into microphones. Instead, every cheer, every gasp, and every laugh comes directly from the crowd. It feels wonderfully alive. One of the most well-known historical facts is that athletic competitions have been part of human civilization for thousands of years. From the Olympic Games of ancient Greece to medieval archery contests, wrestling matches, foot races, and local village competitions, physical skill was celebrated in nearly every culture. Sport entertained people long before professional leagues existed. The first event is a foot race. Nothing complicated.
Run from one oak tree to another. Touch the marker, run back. Simple enough. At least, it looks simple while you're comfortably watching from the sidelines. The competitors line up. Someone raises a hand. The signal is given. They're off. Children immediately sprint alongside the course, not as competitors, but because standing still while other people run appears to violate an important childhood law. The runners kick up little clouds of dust. One takes an early lead. Another wisely saves energy. A third begins impressively, then realizes halfway through that perhaps eating 2 extra honey cakes beforehand wasn't the greatest strategic decision. History remembers many victories. It quietly forgets many regrettable snack choices. The race ends with smiling faces, heavy breathing, and generous applause for everyone involved. Winning matters, participating matters just a little more. Next comes archery. A row of straw targets stands beneath the afternoon sun. The bows are simple yet beautifully crafted. Each arrow has been carefully fletched with feathers. The first archer steps forward, draws, breathes, releases. The arrow flies cleanly through the air before landing near the center. A satisfying cheer follows. Another archer performs even better. A third somehow manages to miss not only the target, but almost the entire hay bale supporting it. He scratches his head thoughtfully. Clearly, the wind is responsible, even though there isn't any. Historians still argue whether mandatory archery practice in medieval England was primarily intended for military readiness or whether local competitions became equally important as community entertainment. In many places, the two purposes blended naturally. Practical skills often doubled this recreation. One quirky historical tidbit tells of medieval contests where competitors attempted unusual feats of balance, accuracy, or endurance simply for bragging rights rather than valuable prizes. Sometimes the reward was little more than admiration, which, judging by the crowd cheering, was more than enough. The next competition involves lifting a heavy stone resting near the edge of the field. It isn't polished, it isn't decorated, it's simply very large. One by one, competitors step forward. Some barely move it. Others raise it to their knees. One particularly strong farmer manages to lift it all the way to his chest. The crowd erupts. Several children immediately attempt to lift the same stone. The stone remains completely unimpressed. You admire its confidence. Nearby, wrestling matches begin. Nothing brutal, nothing angry, just friendly contests testing balance, strength, and technique. Opponents bow politely. They circle. They grip. One clever movement later, someone is unexpectedly lying on the grass staring at the clouds. The spectators laugh warmly. The defeated wrestler laughs too. Losing gracefully appears almost as respected as winning. You notice elderly villagers offering advice after each match. Sometimes the advice is genuinely useful. Sometimes it seems suspiciously designed to confuse the next generation. Always watch your opponent's feet. Never underestimate someone shorter than you. And whatever happens, don't sneeze halfway through. Oddly specific. Perhaps experience is speaking. As the afternoon unfolds, children organize competitions of their own nearby. Skipping contests, hop races, balancing sticks across their shoulders. One little girl invents an entirely new challenge involving walking backwards while balancing an apple on her head. Within minutes, half the children are attempting it. Within 5 minutes, half the apples have rolled into the grass. Innovation often comes with consequences. The smell of fresh bread drifts across the field as families unpack simple meals. Competitions pause. Conversation takes over. Victories are replayed with increasing dramatic detail. By sunset, every successful throw has become slightly farther, every race slightly faster, every stone slightly heavier. Human memory enjoys polishing achievements. The crowd gathers once more for the final event, a team tug of war. A thick rope stretches across the field. Two groups grip tightly, faces determined, feet planted firmly. Someone shouts the signal. The rope tightens. nobody moves. For several long seconds, the contest appears perfectly balanced. Then, one tiny dog decides this looks tremendously exciting and charges directly between both teams. The sudden confusion sends everyone stumbling. The rope goes slack. People collapse into the grass laughing. The dog proudly carries away a loose end of the rope as though it has personally won the championship. Perhaps it has. The applause that follows isn't for the strongest team. It's for the moment everyone will still be talking about next week. You realize that's often the secret behind memorable entertainment. Not flawless performances, unexpected joy. As twilight settles gently over the village, families begin walking home together. The games are finished, the cheers slowly fade, yet conversations continue all along the road. Tomorrow, there may be no races or contests at all. Instead, people will gather once again for something equally powerful, nothing more than conversation itself, where news, rumors, jokes, and lively debates travel faster than any messenger ever could.
The excitement of yesterday's competitions lingers in the air like the last notes of a cheerful song. You hear it in passing conversations before breakfast. Someone insists the strongest farmer lifted the great stone higher than anyone in living memory. Someone else politely points out that every year the story somehow gains another few inches. By next spring, the poor man will probably have lifted an entire hill. That is the wonderful thing about stories. They stretch just enough to become unforgettable. As the morning settles into its familiar rhythm, the village square slowly fills again. Not because another festival has begun, not because traveling performers have returned, simply because people enjoy talking. You find yourself standing beside the village well, where several neighbors are drawing water. Buckets rise, buckets fall, but the real activity isn't happening in the well, it's happening around it. Long before telephones, newspapers, radios, or the internet connected communities, conversation itself served as the world's greatest information network. One of the most widely accepted historical facts is that marketplaces, wells, temples, inns, and village squares acted as important centers for exchanging news. Travelers, merchants, pilgrims, and local residents all contributed pieces of information that slowly spread from place to place. Every conversation became a tiny broadcast. You quickly realize that news doesn't travel in neat headlines, it wanders. Someone begins by discussing the weather. That reminds another person about this year's harvest. The harvest leads naturally into a discussion about neighboring villages, which somehow turns into a debate about whether old Thomas really caught that enormous fish 20 years ago. He certainly says he did. The fish, unfortunately, has never been available for comment. A group of children gathers nearby, pretending not to listen. They fail spectacularly. Children possess an extraordinary ability to overhear conversations adults believe are completely private. One elderly woman lowers her voice dramatically. "I heard a merchant saw a wolf larger than a horse." Another woman smiles patiently. "Last week it was the size of a cow." By next month, a passing baker says with a grin, "It'll be borrowing someone's wagon." Everyone laughs. Rumors, it seems, have always enjoyed regular exercise. Historians still argue whether stories changed more rapidly through oral traditions than modern written communication, or whether communities actually developed surprisingly reliable methods of preserving important information over long distances. The answer probably depends on the story. The bridge washed away, useful. The bridge was carried away by a dragon, slightly less reliable. You wander toward the marketplace. A merchant has arrived with goods from distant towns. His wagon immediately becomes surrounded by curious villagers. Some admire his fabrics, others examine polished metal tools. Many simply want to hear about places beyond the horizon. What does the great city look like? Are the streets truly paved with stone? Did the king really visit last month? Has anyone actually seen the sea? The merchant answers patiently, sometimes honestly. sometimes with just enough dramatic flair to guarantee future customers. You suspect successful merchants have always understood that a good story can be almost as valuable as a good product. One quirky historical tidbit comes from medieval inns, where professional news carriers, merchants, and pilgrims occasionally became minor celebrities because they brought exciting tales from distant lands. People gathered eagerly to hear reports of strange customs, unusual animals, and remarkable buildings. In an age before instant communication, every traveler represented a walking library. You notice a blacksmith wiping sweat from his forehead as several neighbors gather around his workshop. Within minutes, the conversation shifts from horseshoes to weather to weddings to whose cabbage patch has mysteriously been visited by rabbits. Remarkably, everyone has an opinion about the rabbits. The rabbits, naturally, have declined to attend the meeting. Humor flows effortlessly through these conversations. Someone gently teases a friend for oversleeping. Another recalls yesterday's tug of war, insisting the victorious dog deserves honorary citizenship. Laughter spreads. Nobody rushes away. You begin understanding that conversation itself is entertainment. Not every exchange needs a dramatic purpose. Sometimes it's enough simply to enjoy another person's company. Modern life often treats silence as something needing to be filled. Here, silence feels comfortable. A pause isn't awkward, it's simply another part of talking. Two old friends sit beneath an oak tree for several minutes, saying absolutely nothing. Then one quietly points toward the clouds. Looks like rain tomorrow. The other nods. Conversation complete. Oddly satisfying. Nearby, children invent riddles. What has roots that never drink? What walks without feet? What belongs to you but everyone else uses more? Some riddles are clever, some are impossible. One little boy proudly announces a riddle whose answer appears to be another riddle. The adults politely applaud his creativity. Logic can wait until he's older. As afternoon drifts toward evening, you realize that communities before technology stayed remarkably connected not through devices, but through repeated face-to-face encounters. You see the same neighbors at the well, at the market, on the road, in the fields, at shared meals. Relationships deepen because they are constantly renewed. The square slowly empties as families return home for supper. Smoke curls once again from familiar chimneys. Children carry today's newest stories home with remarkable enthusiasm. By tomorrow morning, they'll probably improve them slightly, just enough. As darkness begins settling across the rooftops, church bells echo softly across the valley. Their sound reminds everyone that tomorrow's gathering will be different, quieter, more reflective, filled with rituals, traditions, songs, and moments of shared wonder that have comforted generations through changing seasons. The village prepares to step from lively conversation into something deeper.
The morning begins more quietly than usual. Even before you step outside, you notice the difference. There is still movement in the village, of course. Fires are lit, bread is baked, and animals still insist on reminding everyone that breakfast is very much their priority. But the conversations are softer today, the pace a little slower, as though everyone has silently agreed to leave room for reflection. You follow the steady stream of neighbors walking along a well-worn path. Some carry candles, others carry flowers gathered from nearby fields. Children hold their parents' hands, occasionally skipping ahead before remembering that today is meant to be a calmer occasion. The journey itself becomes part of the experience. Long before cars, buses, or trains, walking together created opportunities for quiet companionship. No one feels the need to fill every moment with conversation. Sometimes the crunch of gravel beneath your feet says enough. One of the most widely accepted historical facts is that religious gatherings formed the heart of community life across much of the ancient and medieval world. Whether in churches,
Temples, mosques, shrines, synagogues, or sacred groves, depending on culture and place, people regularly came together not only for worship, but also to strengthen social bonds. Faith and community often walked side by side. As you approach the small stone building at the edge of the village, sunlight filters through tall trees, scattering shifting patterns across the path. The building itself isn't enormous. It doesn't need to be. Its familiar walls have welcomed generations. Children who once fidgeted during long ceremonies later stood here as adults and eventually returned carrying grandchildren. Places can collect memories just as surely as people do. Inside, candles flicker gently. Their soft light dances across wooden beams and worn stone floors, polished smooth by countless footsteps. The room smells faintly of beeswax, old timber, and fresh herbs someone has thoughtfully arranged near the entrance. It is surprisingly comforting. No elaborate decorations are necessary. The quiet atmosphere does most of the work. People settle onto simple benches. Nobody stares at a phone while waiting. Nobody checks the time every few minutes. Waiting itself becomes peaceful. The first notes of a hymn rise into the air. Voices join gradually, some strong, some hesitant, some slightly out of tune, and somehow, together, they become beautiful. Music inside sacred spaces carries a different feeling than the lively dances around the festival fire. There is less excitement, more stillness. You don't sing to impress anyone. You sing because it feels right. Historians still argue whether ordinary villagers understood every word of formal religious ceremonies, especially in periods when services were conducted in languages unfamiliar to much of the population. Yet even without complete understanding, rituals, music, gestures, and familiar rhythms often carry deep emotional meaning. Not every experience depends entirely on words. Sometimes repetition itself creates comfort. One quirky historical tidbit tells of medieval pilgrims collecting tiny badges or tokens from important holy sites. These simple souvenirs served as cherished reminders of long journeys and meaningful experiences, much like postcards or travel keepsakes today. Apparently, humans have always enjoyed bringing home a little reminder that says, "Yes, I was there." After the gathering ends, nobody rushes home. Instead, people linger outside beneath the trees. Children quietly resume playing. Adults exchange warm greetings. Someone shares fresh bread. Another pours cider into simple wooden cups. The solemnity of the ceremony naturally gives way to gentle conversation. You realize that sacred gatherings are not isolated moments. They flow naturally into ordinary life. An elderly woman sits beneath an oak tree telling a child about traditions her own grandmother taught her decades earlier. Nearby, two friends discuss the changing seasons while watching birds circle overhead. A young couple strolls slowly along the edge of the meadow, speaking so softly you cannot hear a word. Perhaps that's for the best. Some conversations belong only to those sharing them. The afternoon remains wonderfully unhurried. A few villagers continue walking beyond the fields towards a nearby hill, not because they must, simply because the view inspires quiet thought. You follow at a respectful distance. The landscape stretches endlessly before you. Fields shimmer in the sunlight. A river bends lazily through the valley. Smoke rises from distant cottages. Clouds drift without urgency. You suddenly understand why so many cultures found spiritual meaning in the natural world. Beauty has a remarkable ability to encourage reflection. You sit upon a weathered stone. Nothing extraordinary happens.
No dramatic revelation, no mysterious voice echoes across the hills. Instead, a gentle breeze brushes past. Birds continue singing. Somewhere below, children laugh faintly. Life quietly continues. And perhaps that is enough. Modern entertainment often asks for constant excitement. These slower moments ask for attention instead. There is a difference. One fills your senses, the other settles your thoughts. As the afternoon gradually slips towards evening, families begin returning to the village together. The bells ring once more in the distance, not loudly, just enough to remind everyone that another day is gently drawing to a close. Dinner fires are lit, windows glow warmly. The peaceful rhythm of the day slowly gives way to something livelier. Tomorrow, the quiet paths and thoughtful conversations will be replaced by dazzling halls, elaborate feasts, clever entertainers, and extravagant amusements enjoyed in royal courts where boredom is treated almost like an unwelcome guest. Even kings and queens, it turns out, needed ways to pass the time.
The village slowly disappears behind you as the road widens and becomes smoother. Fields give way to carefully tended gardens. Simple cottages become elegant stone buildings. The occasional wagon is replaced by finely decorated carriages, their polished wheels rolling gracefully over the road. You are leaving behind ordinary village life for a place where entertainment is not merely enjoyed, it is expected. Ahead, rising above the surrounding countryside, stands a great castle. Its towers catch the morning sunlight. Bright banners flutter from the walls, each carrying the colors and symbols of the noble family who lives within. Even from a distance, the place feels alive. Messengers hurry through the gates. Servants carry baskets overflowing with fresh bread, vegetables, fruit, and flowers. Stable hands brush magnificent horses until their coats shine. Somewhere inside, musicians are already tuning their instruments. One of the best established historical facts is that medieval royal and noble courts served as important centers of entertainment. Kings, queens, princes, and nobles regularly hosted feasts, tournaments, musical performances, poetry readings, theatrical productions, and elaborate celebrations to strengthen alliances and display their wealth. Life at court could be every bit as busy as life in a village, just considerably better dressed. You pass beneath the castle gate. The courtyard hums with activity. A falcon circles briefly overhead before returning to the gloved arm of its handler. Servants cross paths with astonishing precision, somehow avoiding collisions despite carrying enough dishes to feed what appears to be half the kingdom. You suspect they've mastered a secret art. Either that, or they've simply learned never to stand in the middle of a busy hallway. The great hall is breathtaking. Sunlight pours through tall windows, illuminating polished wooden tables stretching almost the entire length of the room. Bright tapestries cover the walls. They depict heroic battles, mythical creatures, hunting scenes, and ancient legends. Some tell stories without a single written word. You pause to admire one enormous woven scene, showing a knight chasing what appears to be an extremely determined boar. The boar looks suspiciously confident. You quietly hope it escaped. Musicians begin playing near the far end of the hall. Their instruments fill the room with graceful melodies, while guests slowly arrive, greeting one another with practiced courtesy. Conversation here differs from the relaxed gossip of the village well. Words are chosen carefully. Compliments are offered generously. Jokes are delivered with just enough elegance to avoid causing offense, usually. One nobleman attempts an elaborate pun involving horses. Silence follows. A single polite cough echoes somewhere across the hall. Perhaps the less said about that joke, the better. Historians still argue whether life in medieval courts was as glamorous as surviving paintings suggest, or whether constant etiquette, political tension, and competition made court life surprisingly stressful behind its elegant appearance. Magnificent clothing can hide many worries. Soon the feast begins. Servants carry in steaming platters, one after another. Roasted meats, fresh fish, cheeses, seasonal fruits, warm loaves of bread, pies filled with herbs and vegetables, bowls of berries glistening in the sunlight. The aromas drift through the hall with remarkable determination. You suddenly understand why banquets lasted for hours. Nobody wanted them to end. One quirky historical tidbit comes from medieval banquets where elaborate sugar sculptures, known as subtleties, were sometimes displayed between courses. These edible works of art might resemble castles, ships, mythical creatures, or entire landscapes before eventually becoming dessert. Imagine spending hours building a magnificent sugary dragon only for someone to politely ask if they may eat its tail. The dragon surely would understand. Between courses, entertainers step forward. A jester wearing brightly colored clothing begins juggling polished wooden balls, then knives. Then, after carefully looking around for dramatic effect, he pretends to juggle an egg. The audience gasps. The egg slips. He catches it at the very last moment. Thunderous applause. He bows deeply. Only afterwards does he quietly reveal the egg was carved from wood. The crowd laughs even harder. Sometimes the greatest trick is convincing people to imagine the danger. Next comes a poet. Unlike the lively storyteller around the village fire, this performer recites carefully crafted verses celebrating courage, loyalty, changing seasons, and the fleeting nature of time. The hall grows wonderfully still. Even those who cannot remember every line appreciate the rhythm. Words arranged beautifully have always carried their own kind of music. Nearby, several nobles gather around a chessboard. The game unfolds slowly, thoughtfully. Every move receives careful consideration. Observers whisper possible strategies. Nobody touches the pieces without permission. You recognize the familiar look of intense concentration. Apparently, overthinking chess positions is a timeless human tradition. A young page watches quietly beside the table. His eyes move from player to player, absorbing every lesson without anyone formally teaching him. Entertainment once again becomes education. The pattern continues. As evening approaches, dancers fill the center of the hall. Their graceful movements reflect years of practice, elegant bows, measured steps, perfect timing. You briefly imagine yourself attempting the same dance. The image is not encouraging. Best to admire from a safe distance. Laughter echoes warmly beneath the high wooden ceiling. Candles flicker inside polished silver holders. Outside, twilight gently settles across the castle grounds. The feast gradually draws towards a close. Guests depart carrying pleasant memories, full stomachs, and perhaps one or two stories made slightly grander than they truly were. After all, stories enjoy a comfortable seat at every banquet. As you leave the great hall, the cool evening air greets you once more. The castle slowly fades behind. Tomorrow, the grand feasts and elegant performances will give way to something far simpler and perhaps even more remarkable. Children, armed with nothing more than imagination, will prove once again that the greatest playground humanity has ever invented is the human mind itself.
The grand castle slowly disappears behind you, its towers fading into the morning mist until they become little more than distant shapes against the horizon. Ahead lies another village, smaller, quieter, far less concerned with royal banquets and elaborate etiquette. Yet somehow, as you walk toward it, you hear something that sounds remarkably familiar. Children laughing. Some things truly echo across every century. You step through the village gate just as the morning sun begins warming the rooftops. Adults are already busy with their daily work. A blacksmith's hammer rings steadily. A baker slides fresh loaves into a hot oven. Someone hangs freshly washed clothes on a line where they flutter gently in the breeze. Nearby, a group of children has gathered beneath an enormous oak tree. You notice something interesting almost immediately. They don't appear to have many toys, at least not in the modern sense. No plastic blocks, no electronic gadgets, no remote-controlled anything. Yet they look completely occupied. One of the most widely accepted historical facts is that children throughout history invented countless games using whatever materials happened to be available. Sticks, stones, hoops, cloth scraps, wooden dolls, carved animals, shells, nuts, or simple balls made from tightly wrapped fabric or leather. Imagination supplied everything else. One little boy proudly raises a long stick. "This is my horse," he announces. Within seconds, another child produces a stick that is apparently an even faster horse. A third insists hers can fly. Well, that settles it. Horse ownership has become unexpectedly competitive. Soon, the entire group is galloping across the meadow. They leap imaginary streams, charge invisible dragons, rescue imaginary kings, then immediately decide rescuing dragons from imaginary kings sounds much more interesting. Stories evolve quickly when children are in charge. You quietly follow at a safe distance. The battlefield, if one may call a patch of daisies a battlefield, is full of dramatic speeches. One knight declares himself unbeatable. He is defeated approximately 12 seconds later. His opponent kindly allows him another chance. Being invincible turns out to require several attempts. Historians still argue whether children in medieval villages enjoyed as much leisure time as surviving artwork suggests, or whether artists emphasized playful scenes because they symbolized innocence and hope rather than everyday reality. Whatever the exact balance, archaeological discoveries of toys and written descriptions leave little doubt that children found opportunities to play whenever they could. Play seems remarkably persistent. Nearby, several girls gather smooth pebbles into neat little circles. The rules of their game are explained with absolute confidence. Unfortunately, each child appears to explain slightly different rules. Nobody seems concerned. After a few cheerful disagreements, they invent entirely new rules. Problem solved. Modern board game designers would probably recognize the process immediately. Under another tree, a grandfather patiently carves a tiny wooden boat. A little girl watches every careful movement. When he finishes, they carry it together to the nearby stream. The boat floats beautifully for almost 15 glorious seconds. Then it bumps into a reed, spins dramatically, and tips sideways. The little girl bursts into laughter. The grandfather laughs too. Apparently, the voyage was considered a tremendous success. One quirky historical tidbit comes from archaeological excavations that have uncovered small clay whistles shaped like birds, tiny wooden swords, spinning tops, and miniature carts, suggesting that children across many ancient civilizations enjoyed surprisingly familiar toys. The materials changed, the joy remained. A group of older children begins building a small fort using fallen branches. No adult tells them how. Leadership emerges naturally. One gathers sticks, another arranges stones, a third enthusiastically contributes what appears to be an entirely unnecessary collection of leaves. Everyone nods politely. The leaves are accepted. Construction continues. Within an hour, the fort proudly stands. It leans slightly. One wall seems rather optimistic, but from the children's perspective, it is nothing less than a magnificent castle.
That may be one of imagination's greatest gifts. It allows ordinary things to become extraordinary. A shallow stream becomes an ocean. A fallen log becomes a pirate ship. A blanket becomes a royal palace. A cardboard box, well, that particular invention will have to wait a few more centuries. Even so, children would almost certainly have loved it. As the afternoon grows warmer, games shift naturally. Hide and seek among haystacks, running races through wildflowers, guessing cloud shapes, collecting unusually shaped leaves. Who can whistle loudest? Who can balance longest on one foot? Who can make the funniest face without laughing first? That final contest ends almost immediately. Everyone loses, magnificently. You realize something important. Children rarely complain about being bored because they expect the world itself to become part of the game. A puddle, a feather, a butterfly, a shadow stretching across the grass. Everything holds possibility. Adults occasionally pause from their work to watch. Some smile quietly, others pretend not to notice while secretly enjoying every ridiculous moment. One father eventually joins a game of tag. He announces that he intends to win easily. 3 determined children surround him within seconds. Victory proves temporary. The crowd applauds the children's clever strategy. His dignity survives, barely. As golden afternoon light settles across the fields, parents begin calling everyone home. The children scatter reluctantly. They promise to continue tomorrow. The unfinished fort will still be waiting. The wooden boat can probably be repaired. The flying stick horse remains undefeated. Probably. Walking back through the peaceful village, you find yourself smiling. Entertainment before technology wasn't hidden inside machines. It was hidden inside people, especially the smallest ones. And as evening gently approaches once more, you begin to wonder about something entirely different. What happened when there were no games, no festivals, no storytellers, and no crowds at all? What did people do with simple, ordinary silence? That answer waits quietly with tomorrow's sunrise.
The village awakes beneath a pale sky, wrapped in thin morning mist. For once, there is no festival waiting, no traveling performers, no races, no feast, no excited crowd gathering around the square. At first, the quiet feels unusual. After everything you've experienced over the past days, you almost expect someone to appear with a drum, a puppet, or at least a goat determined to become the center of attention. The goat, fortunately for everyone's gardens, appears to be occupied elsewhere. Today is simply ordinary, and perhaps that is exactly what makes it special. You step outside while the dew still clings to the grass. The air feels cool against your face. A robin lands on a nearby fence post, tilting its head as though evaluating whether you are interesting enough to deserve a song. Apparently, you pass the inspection. One clear note rings through the morning, then another. Soon, the entire countryside seems awake. One of the best established historical facts is that before industrialization and widespread artificial lighting, daily life followed the rhythms of daylight and the changing seasons far more closely than it does today. These slower rhythms naturally created moments of quiet observation that modern schedules often leave little room for. You begin walking with no particular destination. That would have seemed inefficient to many modern people. Walking, just to walk. No fitness tracker counting steps, no map suggesting a faster route, no podcast explaining 12 surprising facts about medieval onions. Simply walking. You notice details you might once have ignored. Spiderwebs shining with tiny drops of dew. The scent of damp earth after a cool night. A butterfly drifting lazily from one flower to another with no visible concern for deadlines. Somewhere in the distance, a shepherd whistles softly to his flock.
The tune carries across the fields before fading into the breeze. You stop beside the stream you visited a few days ago. The water flows exactly as it did then, patiently, without hurry. It never seems bored. Perhaps rivers understand something the rest of us occasionally forget. Nearby, an elderly fisherman sits on a smooth rock with remarkable stillness. He has barely moved since you arrived. You wonder whether he has caught anything. He smiles without looking away from the water. Not yet. His voice contains no frustration. Apparently, waiting is part of fishing, and perhaps part of life. Historians still argue whether people in earlier centuries experienced solitude more comfortably than many modern societies do, or whether they simply accepted it as a natural part of existence because constant stimulation was impossible. The answer may never be fully known, but watching this quiet morning unfold, you begin to suspect they developed remarkable patience. One quirky historical tidbit comes from medieval monks, some of whom created intricate illuminated initials, tiny decorative patterns, or careful garden designs during long periods of contemplation. Activities that today might seem slow or repetitive were often treated as meaningful ways to focus the mind. Imagine spending an afternoon carefully painting one elegant letter, not because someone demanded it, because doing it well felt worthwhile. You continue your walk until you reach a hill overlooking the valley, the same hill you visited before. The landscape has not changed, yet somehow you have. The fields seem more familiar now. The winding river almost feels like an old friend. You recognize the distant church tower, the line of ancient oaks, the small bridge crossing the stream. Places become richer each time you notice them. You settle beneath a tree. Nothing happens for several minutes. Then a gentle breeze stirs the leaves overhead. Sunlight flickers across the grass. A pair of swallows swoops gracefully through the air. You smile. There is no performance, no audience, no prize. Yet somehow the moment feels complete. You begin thinking about boredom itself. Perhaps boredom isn't the absence of entertainment. Perhaps it is the beginning of attention. Modern life often rushes to erase every empty moment. Waiting in line? Check your phone. 5 quiet minutes? Scroll through something. A slow afternoon? Find another distraction. But here, silence isn't treated like an emergency. It is simply another season of the day. You remember the storytellers, the musicians, the dancers, the craftspeople, the festivals, the games beside the stream, the children charging into imaginary battles with little more than sticks and confidence. Each moment became meaningful because it stood out against stretches of peaceful, ordinary life. Joy shines brightest when it has room to breathe. As afternoon fades into evening, you notice smoke curling gently from village chimneys. Families prepare supper. Neighbors greet one another along familiar paths. The same rhythms continue, not repetitive, comforting. A little girl walks past carrying the wooden boat her grandfather carved. It has been repaired several times, judging by the patches. She smiles proudly anyway. Some treasured things become more beautiful because they've needed mending. The sun slips lower. Long shadows stretch across the fields. Birdsong gradually softens. One by one, the first stars begin appearing overhead. You realize your journey is almost complete. Only one evening remains, one final quiet gathering, one last opportunity to understand what people truly gained from lives without constant technology. The answer isn't hidden inside a castle, or a festival, or even a story around a fire. It waits gently in the simple connections people built with one another, and with the passing hours themselves. Tomorrow night, As the fire burns low beneath an endless sky, everything you've experienced will quietly come together.
The final evening arrives almost without announcing itself. There are no festival banners fluttering above the village square, no traveling wagon rumbling over the hill, no contest waiting to crown a champion. Instead, life simply settles into its familiar rhythm, the kind you have come to recognize without needing anyone to explain it. The day's work comes to an end, tools are put away, animals are fed, doors remain open just a little longer to welcome the cool evening breeze. You find yourself walking toward the same fire where this journey quietly began. The circle is smaller tonight, not because fewer people care, because nothing extraordinary has been planned. Sometimes the most meaningful evenings are the ordinary ones. One family arrives carrying fresh bread. Another brings a small basket of apples. Someone quietly places another log onto the fire, and the flames respond with a cheerful crackle that sends tiny sparks spiraling toward the stars. You settle onto a familiar wooden bench. It feels almost like returning home. Around you, conversations begin in gentle voices. Nobody is trying to impress anyone. Nobody rushes to tell the greatest story of the night. Instead, people simply talk about the day, the weather, the harvest, the children, the old dog who somehow managed to chase 3 chickens without catching a single one, an admirable commitment to enthusiasm over results. One of the clearest historical facts you've encountered throughout this journey is that before modern technology transformed daily life, community itself was one of humanity's greatest sources of entertainment. Families, neighbors, craftspeople, travelers, musicians, storytellers, and children all contributed to a shared rhythm that filled ordinary days with meaning. Entertainment wasn't delivered, it was created, together. You glance around the fire. The storyteller from your first evening smiles quietly while listening rather than speaking. The musician gently tunes a worn instrument but seems perfectly content not to perform unless someone asks. The basket maker examines a newly finished piece with quiet satisfaction. The children, finally growing sleepy, curl beside their parents instead of racing through the fields. Nothing dramatic happens, and yet the evening feels wonderfully complete. Historians still argue whether people living before the technological age considered themselves happier, lonelier, or simply different from us. Surviving letters, diaries, and oral traditions reveal lives filled with hardship and joy in equal measure, making simple comparisons almost impossible. Every age carries its own challenges. Every age invents its own comforts. One quirky historical tidbit reminds you that even in centuries long before electricity, people occasionally complained about having nothing interesting to do. Apparently, boredom itself is ancient. The difference was what happened next. Someone picked up a musical instrument. Someone carved a toy. Someone walked to a neighbor's house. Someone invented a game. Someone told a story. Someone simply sat beneath a tree and watched the clouds. Instead of asking the world to entertain them, they often entertain the world around them. The fire burns lower now. Its glow grows softer. Conversations become quieter. Every now and then, someone laughs gently at a familiar memory. The dog finally gives up on the chickens and curls into a comfortable ball beside the warmth of the fire. Probably for the best. The chickens look relieved. You lift your eyes toward the night sky. It is every bit as breathtaking as it was on your first evening. Thousands upon thousands of stars stretch across the darkness. Without city lights to compete with them, they seem almost close enough to touch. You remember the storyteller's legends, the children's imaginary dragons, the songs rising into the cool night, the festivals filled with dancing, the craftspeople patiently shaping beauty from ordinary materials, the games played with sticks and stones. The conversations flowing through markets and village wells, the quiet walks through forests and meadows, the thoughtful moments beside rivers. Each memory fits gently beside the next, like carefully woven threads becoming a single tapestry. You realize, almost surprisingly simple, technology did not invent entertainment, it transformed it. Long before glowing screens, people laughed, they wondered, they competed, they celebrated, they created, they imagined. And perhaps most importantly, they shared those moments face to face. The fire settles into glowing embers. Someone quietly begins humming the same gentle melody you heard several evenings ago. Others join softly. No performance, no audience. Just familiar voices blending beneath an ancient sky. The song fades. Nobody rushes to replace the silence. The silence itself has become part of the evening. You take one final look around the circle. Faces illuminated by fading firelight, gentle smiles, comfortable stillness. You have traveled through centuries without a single battery, signal bar, or charging cable, and somehow you were never truly bored. The embers glow softly now, their warmth lingering even as the flames settle into quiet orange light. The conversations have faded into comfortable silence, and one by one your companions make their way home beneath the patient stars. The night feels larger than before, yet somehow gentler, wrapping the village in a peaceful stillness that asks nothing of anyone. A cool breeze wanders through the trees, carrying the scent of wood smoke, fresh grass, and distant fields ready for another sunrise. You remain for just another moment, listening. A cricket sings somewhere beyond the fire. Leaves whisper overhead. The river you visited earlier continues its endless journey through the valley, flowing exactly as it did yesterday and as it will tomorrow. There is comfort in knowing that not everything needs to change to remain beautiful. Perhaps that is the quiet lesson these people have shared with you. They filled their days not by chasing constant excitement, but by noticing small joys before they slipped away. A good story, a shared meal, a song remembered by heart, the satisfaction of carving a smooth piece of wood, children laughing over games made from sticks and stones, neighbors talking until the stars appeared. None of these moments demanded perfection. They only asked for attention. As your own thoughts begin to slow, imagine the fire becoming smaller, the stars growing brighter, and the village settling peacefully into sleep. The houses stand quietly beneath the moonlight, tomorrow waiting patiently beyond the horizon. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing left to accomplish tonight. So let the sounds drift farther away. Let your breathing become slower, and allow the calm of this old world to linger just a little longer. The journey is complete, the road behind you peaceful, and the night wonderfully still.